Imagine standing in the great hall of a medieval castle, flickering torches, gold goblets, roasted boar on the table, nobles laughing in silk and fur. But then someone leans close to speak, and you catch the smell. Not wine, not spice, but rot. Sour breath, decayed meat, something crawling deep inside the mouth. That, right there, is the reality no medieval painting shows you. Behind every chivalrous smile and royal feast, there was a secret horror. The smell of a world that had no toothbrushes, no toothpaste, and no understanding of bacteria. Because here's the shocking truth. In the Middle Ages, no one truly brushed their teeth. Not kings, not knights, not queens, at least not the way we think of it today. They cleaned their mouths with ashes, rubbed their gums with rags, or chewed twigs until they frayed into primitive brushes. Some rinsed with vinegar or wine, others with urine. Yes, urine, believing it purified the mouth. And it wasn't superstition. It was desperation. A desperate attempt to fight pain, rot, and smell in a time when no one knew what caused it. To them, tooth decay wasn't a medical problem. It was a curse, a punishment, or the work of demons gnawing at the bone. When pain came, they prayed before they treated. A toothache could be the price of sin, the whisper of hell, or the will of God himself. And yet, in their own strange way, they tried to fight it. The wealthy chewed herbs like mint and anise to freshen their breath. Peasants rubbed salt and ashes on their teeth, scraping away grime with bits of linen. It didn't work, but it showed something powerful. Even in an age of mud and plague, people still cared about how they smelled. But don't laugh too quickly. The irony is cruel. Peasants often had better teeth than the rich. Why? Because sugar was a luxury only the noble could afford. The more refined the diet, the faster the rot. Kings and queens dined on honeyed fruits and candied almonds, the medieval version of dessert, while peasants gnawed hard bread and onions. One historian said it best. The poor had cleaner mouths, the rich had sweeter ones. Now imagine the streets outside the castle. Open sewers, butchers throwing entrails onto cobblestones, people spitting constantly, wine, phlegm, blood from aching gums. In that choking air, filled with smoke and decay, breath itself became a symbol. Good breath meant purity and holiness. Bad breath? Evil, sin, corruption? Priests preached that foul odor came from a foul soul. The church tied morality to hygiene, even though no one truly understood hygiene at all. So yes, the Middle Ages stank. But beneath the filth was something fascinating, a kind of medieval logic. They believed the mouth was a gateway between the body and the soul. It could praise God or curse him, kiss or blaspheme. To cleanse it, even crudely, was to protect something sacred. And so they experimented, with herbs, ashes, and horrors, to keep that gateway pure. This is the paradox of the medieval smile. It was both sincere and rotten, beautiful in faith, terrible in flesh. And as we peel back the myths of soap and shine, we'll discover the strange, inventive, and sometimes revolting ways people in the Middle Ages tried to fight what they didn't understand, their own decay. Because in a world of superstition and prayer, one truth remained. Everyone feared losing their teeth, and no one really knew how to save them. If you were born in the Middle Ages, your smile revealed everything: your diet, your class, even your soul. The mouth wasn't just a physical feature, it was a window into who you were. In a world without mirrors or dentists, teeth became silent storytellers of sin, wealth, and survival. A noble's decayed grin whispered of gluttony and sugar. A peasant's crooked but sturdy teeth told of hunger and hard bread. And behind every breath, sweet or foul, lay centuries of belief and ignorance, tangled together like roots beneath a grave. Let's start with diet, the first culprit. Peasants lived mostly on coarse bread, onions, porridge, and ale. Their food was rough but simple. Little sugar, no refined flour, almost no sweets. Ironically, this kept their teeth stronger than their lords. The nobles, however, indulged in luxury: honeyed meats, candied fruits, and imported sugar from the East, the ultimate medieval status symbol. To taste sweetness was to taste power. But sweetness came with a curse. Their teeth rotted, blackened, and broke. Some queens reportedly had their teeth replaced with carved ivory or bone, a grotesque luxury that made their smiles even more lifeless. And yet, bad teeth weren't just a matter of pain, they were a moral warning. To medieval minds, disease wasn't random, it was divine justice. A rotten tooth meant more than infection, it meant spiritual decay. Priests and physicians alike believed that foul breath rose from the corruption of the soul. In sermons, a stinking mouth symbolized lies, sin, and heresy. The mouth was sacred. It spoke prayers, kissed relics, received the Eucharist. To defile it was to offend God Himself. This belief gave rise to strange remedies that blurred the line between medicine and religion. To cure toothache, monks recited prayers while tying herbs around the jaw. Some prescribed a mixture of holy water, vinegar, and ashes to wash away the devil. Others believed that the pain came from worms living inside the teeth. Yes, tooth worms, an ancient myth that survived for centuries. The treatment? Burn herbs or seeds near the tooth so that the worms would flee from the smoke. In reality, all they achieved was agony and burned gums. But pain was everywhere. Imagine a medieval market square, vendors shouting, horses neighing, blacksmiths hammering, and in one corner a man screaming as a barber surgeon yanked a rotten tooth with iron pliers. No anesthesia, no mercy. The crowd watched, some in pity, others in fascination. A single tooth extracted in the open air, blood dripping onto straw, the smell of iron mixing with sweat, was as common as a haircut. And for many, it was the only cure. Still, not all medieval people accepted suffering quietly. The wealthy began to see the mouth as something worth maintaining, not just for health, but for beauty. Courtly love poems praised the red lips and white teeth of noble ladies. Frescoes showed saints and angels with perfect smiles. Even kings sought fresh breath, using herbal rinses or chewing aniseed before diplomacy. The smile became political, a tool of persuasion, charm, and control. And yet, beneath the perfumes and prayers, the truth remained brutal. By the age of 30, most adults had lost several teeth. By 40, many mouths were half empty. The poor endured it, the rich hid it. Toothache was so common that it became part of everyday language, as constant as a tooth's pain. No one escaped it. The body's slow decay was simply another reminder that life, like the flesh, was temporary. So the medieval mouth was more than biology. It was philosophy. It was where the sacred met the grotesque. It prayed in the morning, feasted at noon, and screamed by night. It spoke poetry and wrought in the same breath. And through it all, people clung to one idea, that the state of your mouth reflected the state of your soul. To cleanse one was to heal the other, or so they believed. But what did they actually use to clean it? What did toothpaste look like before science, before mint, before logic? The answer will make your stomach turn. Because in the next chapter, we enter the strange world of ashes, vinegar, and human urine. If you could step into a medieval apothecary, you'd think you had entered a place of healing. Shelves lined with glass jars, bundles of herbs hanging from rafters, the faint scent of rosemary and sage mixing with smoke. But look closer. On one shelf sits powdered bone. Another holds ground oyster shells. In the corner, a clay pot of stale urine. The apothecary smiles proudly because these are the ingredients for what he calls dentifrice, the medieval version of toothpaste. Yes, it's real. Medieval people brushed their teeth, just not the way we would. Their recipes for oral care were a blend of desperate ingenuity and horrifying improvisation. Across Europe, manuscripts from monks, physicians, and housewives reveal dozens of recipes, some oddly effective, others dangerously abrasive. A common one, copied by healers in 14th century England, mixed ashes from burnt rosemary, crushed salt, and a touch of honey. The result was a coarse gray paste rubbed on the teeth with linen or the finger. "Rub the teeth well," it instructed, "to make them white as bone." The irony, of course, is that it was bone, ground and mixed into powder. The more exotic the ingredients, the higher the social class of the user. Nobles might use burnt deer antlers or powdered marble. Monks, guided by herbal knowledge, preferred sage, mint, and vinegar. Peasants relied on whatever they could burn: bread crusts, charcoal, or salt mixed with spit. These mixtures could scrape away grime, but they also stripped enamel, scarred gums, and sometimes led to infection. In their pursuit of purity, they were literally grinding their teeth away. Then there was urine. To us, it sounds revolting. To them, it was science. Ancient Roman physicians like Pliny the Elder once wrote that urine, especially from young boys, had cleansing and whitening powers. The ammonia in it, though they didn't understand the chemistry, actually did disinfect and bleach. So the idea persisted. By the Middle Ages, many believed that rinsing one's mouth with urine could purify it. Some nobles even paid servants to collect the freshest samples. Others mixed it with vinegar and herbs for a mouthwash that stung like acid. To rinse with it was considered bold, even fashionable. If you were lucky, your toothpaste smelled like mint and cloves. If you were poor, it smelled like fire and smoke. One Italian text from the 12th century suggested mixing ashes from burnt myrtle and eggshells with a drop of vinegar to drive away foul odor. Another, more bizarrely, recommended grinding mouse bones to powder for the swift healing of aching gums. It's unclear if anyone ever tried it, but nothing in medieval medicine was too strange to believe. Herbal mixtures were the most common and often the most pleasant. Sage, rosemary, and thyme were prized for their cleansing smell. Wealthy women carried little pouches of herbs near their lips or chewed cloves after feasts. Monks kept rosemary gardens for both prayer and purification. Their breath scented faintly with the same herbs used to bless the dead. It was an elegant irony. The same plants used for burial were also used to preserve the living. But even the most careful routines couldn't stop the inevitable. Tooth decay wasn't just dirt. It was disease. The gums swelled, teeth blackened, and pain pulsed like a drum in the jaw. And when the herbs failed, the salt burned, and the vinegar corroded, people turned to superstition. They recited charms while rubbing their teeth, invoking saints against the worm of pain. The mixture of faith and chemistry, sin and science, defined their entire understanding of the mouth. Still, one can't help but admire their persistence. They lived in a world that smelled of sweat, smoke, and rot. And yet they tried to stay clean, tried to keep dignity, tried to make their smiles presentable in the face of ignorance. Every ash paste, every vinegar rinse, every whispered charm was an act of defiance against decay, against death itself. Because even without mirrors, the medieval world knew one truth. Your breath was your presence. To let it stink was to lose part of your humanity. And so they scrubbed, they burned, they rinsed, and they hoped that somewhere beneath the grime and pain, a clean soul might still be found. Picture a medieval noble sitting in a grand hall after a feast, lamb bones piled high, mead sloshing in goblets, a minstrel playing in the corner. The noble picks his teeth with a thin sliver of gold, carved and polished like jewelry. He doesn't know it, but in that simple motion, he's holding one of the earliest dental tools in history. For while the Middle Ages didn't invent the toothbrush as we know it, they certainly invented ways to keep the mouth in motion, scraping, chewing, polishing, picking, and rinsing with whatever nature and ingenuity allowed. Let's start with the simplest tool of all, the chewing stick. In Europe, it was often a twig from hazel, birch, or walnut trees, cut fresh and softened at one end by chewing until it frayed into bristles. The user would then rub it across the teeth and gums, dislodging food and plaque with surprising effectiveness. This method was borrowed from the Islamic world, where the miswak, a twig from the Salvadora persica tree, had been used for centuries. Muslim traders brought the idea westward, and by the 12th century, Crusaders had seen these strange, holy sticks that left the breath clean and the teeth polished. The idea stuck, quite literally, and spread through the Mediterranean. For those who couldn't afford imported sticks or fancy pastes, there were rags. Rough linen or wool cloths dipped in salt or ashes were rubbed against the teeth and gums. It was painful, but it worked, at least temporarily. Women sometimes wrapped the cloth around their fingers and rubbed gently, often after meals or before prayer. It was less about appearance and more about respect. To speak to someone with foul breath was considered shameful, even impious. The act of cleaning one's mouth, however crudely, was a small ritual of courtesy. Then came the toothpicks, objects of both necessity and luxury. Commoners whittled them from wood or bone. Nobles commissioned them in gold, silver, or even crystal. These tiny tools were carried in belts or worn as pendants, not just for hygiene, but for status. In royal courts, offering someone a toothpick was an act of intimacy, a gesture that blurred the line between grooming and flirting. Chroniclers mention kings who gifted ivory toothpicks as tokens of favor, a glittering sign of privilege that literally came between one's teeth. Wine and vinegar rinses were also popular. After meals, people swished these liquids in their mouths, believing the acids cut through corruption. While it may have stung, it was oddly effective at killing some bacteria. In monasteries, where hygiene was tied to spiritual discipline, monks often used herbal rinses made of mint, sage, and myrrh. These ingredients symbolized purity and devotion, their scent carrying both medicinal and religious weight. A clean mouth was not vanity. It was obedience to divine order. Interestingly, some of the earliest mouthwash cups have been found in medieval ruins, small ceramic or glass vessels, likely used for rinsing. Archaeologists discovered traces of vinegar and herbs inside. Imagine a 13th century noblewoman standing before a polished brass mirror, swirling a bitter herbal brew around her mouth, trying not to gag. The taste of mint and smoke mixing with metal. Her reflection flickers in the candlelight, a fleeting moment of self-care in an age without comfort. Even travelers had their tools. Manuals for knights and pilgrims recommended carrying a small pick for the teeth and a twig for the breath. Hygiene, while not universal, was valued by those who crossed distances and met strangers. After all, your breath announced you before your words did. And in a time when hospitality and honor were sacred, smelling pleasant was as important as being brave. Of course, there were missteps, tools made of lead, pastes that corroded enamel, or twigs that caused gum infections. But for every mistake, there was innovation. The Middle Ages weren't stagnant, they were experimental. Every castle, monastery, and village tried its own combination of earth, plant, and prayer. And though their knowledge was imperfect, their instinct was timeless. To clean is to care, to preserve what little beauty life allows. The next time you see a gold toothpick in a museum, don't laugh at its simplicity. See it for what it was, a bridge between ignorance and invention. A small, gleaming rebellion against rot. Because in a world that rotted quickly, even the smallest act of cleaning one's teeth was an act of hope. But when that hope failed, when pain roared and gums swelled, the medieval smile met its darkest enemy. And that battle was fought not in silence, but in the brutal hands of the barber surgeons. Imagine walking through a medieval marketplace at noon, the smell of bread, smoke, sweat, and iron. At one end, traders shout prices for spices and cloth. At the other, a small crowd gathers around a wooden stool. There sits a man in a leather apron, sleeves rolled up, his tools laid out on a blood-stained cloth. Knives, saws, pliers, and something that looks disturbingly like a corkscrew. He's not a butcher, he's a barber surgeon. And today, he's not cutting hair, he's pulling teeth. The barber surgeon was the closest thing most medieval people ever had to a dentist. These men, part healer, part showman, part torturer, did everything from amputations to bloodletting to extracting rotten teeth. They learned through experience, not schooling. Their knowledge came from observation and survival, mostly of others, sometimes their own. And when someone approached with a toothache, face swollen, mouth reeking of infection, there was only one cure: removal. The process was brutal. There was no anesthesia, no sterilization, no understanding of infection. The barber would have the patient sit, or if the pain was unbearable, he'd have 2 assistants hold the person down. The tool of choice was the pelican, or tooth key, a crude device shaped like a bird's beak. He'd place it over the tooth, twist sharply, and hope for the best. Sometimes the entire tooth came out cleanly. Other times the jaw cracked, gums tore, or the wrong tooth broke loose. The screams were so common that crowds stopped noticing. Blood flowed onto the dirt. The smell of iron filled the air. Yet, oddly, people trusted these men. Not because they were gentle, but because they were effective. A barber who could remove a tooth quickly and cleanly became a local hero. It was instant relief from agony, the kind of pain that haunted sleep and sanity alike. In an age where a toothache could drive a person mad, that one violent twist was salvation. There are records of peasants thanking their barber surgeon afterward, even as their mouths bled and their faces swelled. But there were others, the traveling tooth pullers. They roamed from town to town, performing extractions in public squares like circus acts. To attract attention, they'd wear colorful clothes and shout rhyming slogans. "Come one, come all, pain removed for a penny." They'd cry, brandishing pliers like trophies. Sometimes they'd pretend to pull a healthy tooth to show off their skill, then sneak it into a pocket while revealing a bloody fake one for applause. Medicine and theater blurred together in a haze of pain and spectacle. Those who couldn't afford even that turned to home remedies. Some rubbed crushed garlic on the gums or packed cavities with honey and ashes. Others clutched charms, tiny silver teeth offered to saints in hope of healing. The most desperate prayed to Saint Apollonia, the patron saint of dentistry, who according to legend had her own teeth ripped out by torturers. People whispered her name while holding their cheeks in the dark, believing she could numb their pain. Among nobles, things weren't much better. They had physicians, educated, cautious, and utterly useless when it came to teeth. Some recommended poultices of vinegar and herbs, Others applied hot irons to draw out the evil spirits. One French queen was said to have endured such agony that her physicians ordered all her remaining teeth removed to prevent further corruption. She died soon after, from infection. In monasteries, monks practiced gentler methods. They used herbal salves made of myrrh, sage, and wine, combined with prayer. Some even performed minor surgeries in secret, though the church frowned upon such worldly work. The tension between faith and science left mouths rotting while remedies were written in Latin no peasant could read. And yet, for all the horror, there was progress hidden in the pain. The barber surgeons developed tools and techniques that would later evolve into modern dentistry. They learned how to control bleeding, how to grip teeth cleanly, how to cauterize wounds with heated iron. They may have been butchers, but they were also pioneers, the rough ancestors of the clean, white-smiled profession we know today. When you walk through a museum and see a medieval tooth key, rusted and sinister, remember this: it wasn't just an instrument of torture. It was a symbol of resilience, of people who refused to surrender to pain, who demanded control over their bodies even when science had abandoned them. Because in the medieval world, survival was medicine. And sometimes a scream in the marketplace was the sound of healing. In the Middle Ages, your smile was not just a reflection of your health. It was a declaration of who you were. Teeth, like clothing or speech, became silent markers of social class. The poor had strong, yellowed teeth worn from coarse bread and stone-ground flour. The rich had sweet, decaying smiles, polished at court, rotten underneath. It was a strange paradox. The more luxurious your life, the faster your mouth betrayed you. Among the nobility, beauty was a weapon, and smiles were part of that arsenal. Poets praised lips like coral, teeth white as milk, and knights were expected to charm with both words and appearance. Courtly love demanded elegance in all things, even breath. Chronicles tell of noblewomen who chewed clove, cinnamon, and nutmeg before greeting guests. Servants carried little pouches of herbs for them, perfuming their mouths to disguise the sourness of wine or decay. The scent of mint was considered divine, a mark of refinement. Yet, this obsession with freshness was both privilege and illusion. Sugar, the most precious luxury of the age, was a silent killer. Imported from the East, sold for more than gold, it appeared in royal kitchens as candy, sauces, and glazed fruits. Every banquet became a dental massacre in disguise. By middle age, many nobles had blackened or missing teeth, some replaced by carved ivory or animal bone. Queens smiled less in portraits for a reason, not out of pride, but to hide what time and sugar had done. Among peasants, the story was rougher but more honest. Their diet was harsh: porridge, onions, ale, bread baked with grit. The constant grinding wore teeth down flat, but decay was rare. There were no sweets, no honeyed feasts, no sugary indulgence. Their mouths were crude but sturdy, built for survival. In a cruel twist, poverty preserved them. A peasant could live to old age with more natural teeth than a prince who dined on pleasure. Cleanliness, too, reflected hierarchy. The rich had linen cloths, herbs, and silver toothpicks. The poor had rags and twigs. Nobles could afford exotic powders and imported spices to sweeten their breath. Peasants relied on ash and salt. Even the act of cleaning one's teeth was considered a luxury, a sign that you had time and resources to worry about such things. For the laborer in the fields, hygiene was a dream postponed by hunger. But there was another divide: vanity. For nobles, cleanliness wasn't just about health, it was about image. They washed their hands before feasts, perfumed their hair, and tried to smell civilized in a world that reeked of sweat and smoke. To appear pure was to be noble. Bad breath was seen as moral failure, a stench of sin as much as the body. The church preached that inner decay revealed itself through outer odor. A noble's breath, perfumed with cloves and roses, became both a fashion statement and a declaration of virtue. And women bore the heaviest burden of all. A lady's beauty was her power, and her mouth, soft, perfumed, smiling, was its center. Manuals of etiquette warned against open laughter, for it showed too much teeth and risked impropriety. Women were taught to smile demurely, to cover their mouths when speaking, to maintain an illusion of grace. Behind that poise, however, many suffered quietly with aching gums and abscesses. Pain was endured in silence, hidden beneath perfume and prayer. In portraits and poems, we see those perfect faces, pale, serene, timeless. But imagine the truth beneath the paint: gums bleeding from vinegar rinses, teeth loose from decay, breath masked by clove and honey. The beauty of the Middle Ages was fragile, maintained by ritual and denial. Nobles could command armies and build cathedrals, but they could not command their own bodies. Even kings rotted from the mouth outward. Meanwhile, peasants, mocked for their smell and grime, smiled without shame. Their laughter, though tooth-worn and rough, was honest. In a sense, they lived closer to nature, their mouths reflecting their world, unpolished, imperfect, enduring. The noble smile was a mask. The peasant's was survival itself. So when you picture the medieval smile, remember this: it wasn't about beauty, it was about class, pride, and power. The rich polished their rot, the poor lived with theirs. And in the clash between vanity and survival, both sought the same thing: dignity in decay. Because in the end, whether you wore gold or rags, every mouth told the same story. Life was short, pain was constant, and the smile was the one lie everyone learned to keep. In the medieval world, the line between physical decay and spiritual corruption was razor thin. To rot was to sin. To stink was to offend God. And no part of the body symbolized that truth more intimately than the mouth. It was through the mouth that men lied, priests preached, lovers kissed, and sinners confessed. It was the gate of both grace and corruption. And in that paradox, religion took hold of the very act of breath itself. The church ruled not only over souls, but over smells. To have foul breath wasn't simply embarrassing, it was moral decay made visible. Monks wrote that bad odors emanated from the body as signs of inner evil. A clean scent, by contrast, was seen as proof of purity. In sermons, priests warned that the stench of sin escapes through the mouth. If your breath reeked, perhaps it was not your teeth but your conscience that was rotting. This belief turned hygiene into theology. Monastic orders developed detailed rules about cleanliness, though always tempered by suspicion of vanity. Monks were to wash their mouths after meals, not for pleasure, but as discipline against gluttony. They could rinse with wine or water, but perfumes and spices were forbidden. Too indulgent, too worldly. To smell sweet was to flirt with temptation. But to smell foul was to risk the judgment of both peers and God. It was a delicate balance between holiness and humiliation. The mouth's holiness ran deep in doctrine. It was the vessel of the Eucharist, the sacred act of consuming the body of Christ. Before communion, believers were instructed to fast, to cleanse themselves, and even to brush their teeth with water or wine, that no corruption touch the host. The body had to be worthy of the divine. To let food or filth remain in the mouth before receiving the sacrament was a form of blasphemy. Cleanliness here was not vanity, it was salvation. Confession also revolved around the mouth. Words themselves carried weight, not just moral, but spiritual. Priests described lies and gossip as rot of the tongue. Poets compared a deceitful kiss to the breath of death. The medieval imagination tied every act of speech and sin to the air we exhaled. Breath was life. Foul breath was a symptom of damnation. In their own way, medieval people were obsessed with purification, not of the body, but of the invisible essence that flowed through it. But the fear of sin did not stop at breath. The entire mouth became a battlefield between purity and corruption. Toothache was punishment. Bleeding gums were the wages of sin. People prayed to saints for mercy, especially to Saint Apollonia, the patron of tooth sufferers. Her legend spread across Europe. Tortured by having her teeth torn out, she became a symbol of holy endurance. When pain struck, peasants whispered, "Saint Apollonia, keep my teeth whole as yours were broken." They wore charms shaped like tiny silver teeth, hoping she would intercede. It was faith as medicine, desperate, devout, and deeply human. In monasteries, fasting monks chewed parsley or fennel not to freshen their breath for vanity's sake, but to suppress hunger and ward off the devil's whispers. Even herbs were tools of morality. Sweet smells were linked to virtue, foul odors to sin. The same logic was applied to disease. Plague and leprosy were not simply illnesses, but signs of divine punishment. To smell decay was to witness the wages of wickedness. What's striking is how the Church's teachings both hindered and preserved hygiene. On one hand, vanity was condemned. Too much attention to one's body meant pride. On the other, purity required discipline, and discipline demanded cleanliness. So people lived in contradiction, scrubbing to please God, avoiding comfort to avoid sin. The result was a strange, anxious kind of hygiene, one done in fear rather than understanding. And yet, from that fear emerged ritual, the first habits that made cleanliness a daily act. Washing after meals, rinsing before prayer, chewing herbs to keep one's breath holy. Behind every medieval mouthwash, there was a prayer. Behind every prayer, a hope that the soul would smell pure. Because in a world where sickness and sin were the same, the scent of one's breath was more than hygiene. It was a confession. And as faith and superstition intertwined, one question remained unspoken in every church, every castle, every hovel. If God judged by scent, what did he think of the human mouth? By the dawn of the Renaissance, Europe began to wake from its long medieval sleep. And with it, the human body returned to focus. Art, science, and curiosity replaced fear, and suddenly, the human smile was no longer just a moral symbol, it became a thing of beauty again. But the scars of the Middle Ages lingered. Centuries of superstition, rot, and pain still whispered through every aching jaw and every prayer to Saint Apollonia. The shift began quietly, in the workshops of alchemists and physicians who dared to question divine explanations for disease. Anatomy was no longer heresy, but discovery. Surgeons dissected corpses, sketched bones, and mapped the mouth with fascination. Leonardo da Vinci's notebooks show detailed drawings of teeth and jaws, not as instruments of sin, but as wonders of engineering. The smile was becoming scientific again. With new trade routes came new remedies. From the East arrived tooth powders of crushed coral, musk, and burned shells. From the Americas came tobacco and cinnamon, at first used for medicine, later for luxury. Distilled alcohols, stronger than medieval vinegars, became powerful disinfectants. Even so, the old habits remained. Many still brushed with rags and twigs, still rinsed with wine or ashes, still feared the tooth worm said to gnaw from within. Progress never comes cleanly, it always carries the dirt of what came before. Yet one thing had changed: the mirror. As glassmaking improved, reflection spread beyond palaces into homes. For the first time, ordinary people could truly see their own faces and their teeth. Vanity, which the church had long condemned, now found a new ally in self-awareness. The smile became personal. People no longer cleaned for God or class, but for themselves. And so began a new obsession: appearance as identity. In royal courts, whiteness became fashion. Queen Elizabeth IV of England, centuries after the Middle Ages ended, famously used a paste of honey and powdered charcoal to whiten her teeth, a ritual that destroyed them slowly, but made them shine briefly in candlelight. Her smile, both regal and fragile, was the last echo of medieval contradiction. Beauty purchased through pain. Across Europe, apothecaries sold powders of chalk, alum, and coral, claiming to make teeth white as pearls and breath sweet as roses. The dream was the same. Only the language had changed. But while nobles sought beauty, doctors began to seek truth. By the late 16th century, medical schools taught that tooth decay came from trapped food and infection, not demons or worms. Instruments became cleaner, extraction more careful, even if still cruel. The barber surgeon was slowly transforming into the modern dentist. Metal tools were refined, forceps replaced keys, and for the first time, dental hygiene entered the realm of science rather than spectacle. Still, the cultural ghosts of the Middle Ages never disappeared entirely. The fear of bad breath, born from moral teaching, remained. The fascination with white teeth, born from nobility, survived. The rituals of herbs and rinses continued, dressed in new names and perfumes. What changed was understanding. Humans had learned that to fight rot, one must first study it. And so began the long battle between vanity and biology. A battle that continues every time we reach for a toothbrush. When we look back now, it's easy to laugh at the medieval mouth, at the urine rinses, the salt scrubs, the golden toothpicks. But beneath the grime and superstition lies something deeply human: the eternal desire to be clean, to be whole, to be presentable before both God and one another. Every act of brushing, rinsing, or praying over a toothache was an act of dignity in a dirty world. Because the medieval smile, whether noble or peasant, perfumed or bloodied, was never just about hygiene. It was about hope. Hope that the pain would fade. Hope that beauty could endure. Hope that, even for a moment, one might stand before the mirror or before heaven and be seen as pure. And so the story of how medieval people brushed their teeth, or didn't, is not a tale of ignorance. It's a story of survival, a story that begins in filth and faith and ends with the birth of knowledge. For in every rotten tooth of the past lies the seed of progress, and in every smile today, a ghost of the Middle Ages still lingers.